Welcome back to It's Polarizing. Today, we're diving into the Bible's most intriguing stories. We're talking tales that have puzzled theologians and inspired countless Renaissance paintings. This isn't about bashing beliefs, it's about exploring inconsistencies and having a laugh. Think of it as a respectful roast of a very, very old book. So, grab your snacks and settle in. It's going to be biblical. Let's start with a classic, Noah's Ark. Two of every animal, a giant boat, a worldwide flood. Sounds simple, right? But when you break it down, it sounds less like a miracle and more like a logistical nightmare. Millions of species. Did Noah have a super-powered Pokedex? How did he round them all up? Did he have a team of helpers, or was it a solo mission? Building a vessel big enough to house that menagerie would be a feat of engineering even today. Imagine the blueprints, the materials, the sheer manpower required. We're talking a pre-Home Depot, pre-power tools era here. Every plank, every nail, all done by hand. And let's not forget the animal care. Feeding, cleaning up after. Imagine the sheer volume of panda poop. And that's just one species. It's a logistical puzzle wrapped in a theological enigma. How did Noah manage the dietary needs of carnivores and herbivores alike? Some might argue it's a metaphor. Okay, sure maybe, but even metaphors need to make some sense. But even as a metaphor, it raises questions. Why choose a flood? Was God having a really bad day? Or was it a divine reset button? The story, taken literally, presents some hefty logistical hurdles. The planning alone would be monumental, and even interpreted metaphorically, it still leaves us with a few head-scratchers. What lessons are we supposed to learn from this? It's a story that deserves more scrutiny than a quick flannel graph explanation. We need to dig deeper. It's like saying, yeah, I cleaned my room, when you just shoved everything under the bed. It's not really clean, is it? And the flood itself? A global, all-encompassing deluge? The sheer scale of the destruction is unsettling. Entire ecosystems wiped out in one fell swoop. It's like God hit the reset button on civilization but forgot to save the game first. A fresh start, but at what cost? So next time you hear the story of Noah's Ark, don't just picture a cute little boat with smiling animals. Think about the reality. Imagine the chaos, the noise, the smell, the sheer pandemonium of it all. Imagine Noah desperately trying to separate the fighting hippos while shoveling tons of elephant dung. It's not a pretty picture. Plus, where did all the water go afterwards? Did God just shrug and say, oops, my bad? Did it evaporate, or was it magically absorbed? And what about the plants? Did they get a 2x2 invite to the ark as well, or were they left to fend for themselves? And let's not even get started on the inbreeding implications of having just two of every animal. Genetic diversity would be a serious issue, so yeah, the story of Noah's Ark. It's a classic, sure, but it's also a logistical and ethical minefield. A tale that raises more questions than it answers. And maybe, just maybe, that's something worth thinking about. It's a story that challenges us to think critically. It's a story that perhaps deserves a second, more critical look. A deeper dive into its complexities. Next up, the Tower of Babel. Humanity, united in a common goal. Building a tower so high it'll tickle God's toes. And God's reaction? Not a polite please don't, but a full-blown cosmic hissy fit. He scatters humanity across the globe, confuses their languages, and ends their ambitious project. On the surface, it's a story about pride and the dangers of hubris. But dig a little deeper and it starts to feel a bit petty. Like God was threatened by a skyscraper? Really? And the punishment? Confusing languages? It seems a bit excessive. Imagine being one of those builders. You're working hard, and suddenly you can't understand your co-worker. Your blueprint is now in a language you've never seen before. It's a story that raises serious questions about God's motives and methods. Was he really that worried about humanity reaching heaven? Or was he just having a bad millennia? And let's be honest, confusing languages isn't exactly a constructive solution. It's more like a recipe for miscommunication and conflict. The Tower of Babel story, much like a poorly assembled IKEA bookshelf, leaves us with more questions than answers. It's a story that, frankly, could use a good editor, and maybe a sensitivity reader. So the next time you hear the story of the Tower of Babel, don't just think of it as a cautionary tale about pride. Think of it as a reminder that even divine beings can have questionable management skills. So yeah, the Tower of Babel, a story about ambition, divine insecurity, and the perils of poor communication. It's a story that perhaps deserves a bit more unpacking than a Sunday school lesson allows. Maybe it's time we re-examine these ancient tales with a modern lens. After all, stories like these shape our understanding of the world and our place in it. And sometimes the pieces of the puzzle need a fresh perspective to fit together. Let's dive into the third story. Abraham's test, divine dad jokes gone too far. God tells Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac, just casually throws it out there like it's a weekend chore. Mow the lawn, take out the trash, sacrifice your only son. Abraham, bless his heart, sets about following these instructions. He builds an altar, ties up Isaac, and raises the knife. It's only at the last possible second that an angel intervenes, shouting, "Psych, just kidding, don't actually murder your kid." Now, even setting aside the obvious moral issues here, the whole thing feels bizarre, like a cosmic prank gone way too far. What kind of test is this? Is God testing Abraham's obedience, his faith? Or is it something else entirely? And what about Isaac? Poor kid. He's just chilling, probably thinking about what snacks he wants after this little father-son bonding trip, and then bam! He's tied up on an altar about to become a burnt offering. This story is often cited as an example of Abraham's unwavering faith, but honestly it feels more like an example of divine capriciousness. It's like God flipped a coin and decided, heads, Abraham gets a gold star for blind obedience. Tails, Isaac gets, well, you know. And the angel's intervention? Just kidding. Seriously, after all that emotional turmoil, the story of Abraham and Isaac is not a heartwarming tale of faith. It's a deeply unsettling story about blind obedience, questionable parenting, and a God with a seriously twisted sense of humor. It's a story that deserves more than just a quick Sunday school gloss over. It deserves a full-blown ethical interrogation. And what kind of message does this send? Obey me without question, even if it means doing something horrific or else. So, yeah, the story of Abraham and Isaac. A story about faith, fear, and a God who apparently enjoys playing mind games with his followers. It's a story that perhaps deserves a bit more critical analysis than a Sunday school flannel graph can provide. Maybe it's time we look at these stories with a more discerning eye. Next in line, Lot's wife. Let's call this one salty and unfairly seasoned. Finally, we have Lot's wife. Fleeing from the divinely ordained destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, she makes the fatal mistake of looking back. Boom! Instant pillar of salt, seasoned to perfection apparently. Now again, the surface level message is about obedience. Don't look back. Keep moving forward. But the punishment seems disproportionate, like getting a life sentence for jaywalking. Imagine being Lot. You're fleeing a burning city. Your entire life is going up in smoke, and you turn around to see your wife has been transformed into a condiment. Talk about a bad day. And what was she looking back at? Her home, her memories, the burning wreckage of her life. It's a human reaction, isn't it? To look back, to try and make sense of the devastation. And God's response? Nope, salt, next. This story raises so many questions. Why was looking back such a big deal? Was God worried she'd change her mind and run back into the burning city? The story of Lot's wife isn't just about obedience. It's about arbitrary punishment, divine pettiness, and the dangers of looking back. It's a story that, frankly, leaves a bad taste in your mouth. Pun intended. So next time you hear the story of Lot's wife, don't just think of it as a cautionary tale about obedience. Think of it as a reminder that even divine beings can be surprisingly petty. And maybe invest in a good salt grinder. You never know when you might need it. So yeah, the story of Lot's wife. A story about obedience, punishment, and a God with a penchant for dramatic overreactions. So what did we learn? Probably nothing. 4 biblical stories, 4 opportunities to question, ponder, and maybe even chuckle a little. This isn't about disrespecting beliefs. It's about engaging critically with these stories. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe to It's Polarizing for more thought-provoking content. See you next time.